Welcome to the Christian Atheist, where faith and reason fuse in the incarnation. Episode number 105, chat with Dr. Charles Howell of Youngstown State University of Ohio, from Dr. Howell's bio page at Youngstown State. Charles Howell, an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War era, earned a bachelor's degree in social studies education from Georgia State University. After teaching in elementary schools in Georgia and Maine, he took a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Iowa. For 9 years, he taught composition at Syracuse University, before completing doctoral work in philosophy of education in 2001. Prior to arrival at Youngstown State University, he taught education courses at Morehead State University in Minnesota and served as department chair at Northern Illinois University. Dr. Howell's scholarship focuses on political and ethical issues in education, especially parents' right and responsibility to control the education of their children. He has been active in the national debate about the social and political implications of homeschooling. His 2 children were educated at home from ages 10 and 11. Dr. Howell was appointed Dean of the Beagley College of Education in 2012. Under his leadership, education and counseling programs were reaccredited in 2016 and 2018. At the height of the pandemic, in spring 2020, he oversaw the merger of education with the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, and now serves as Dean of the new college, Beagley College of Liberal Arts, Social Sciences, and Education, known by the mellifluous acronym Be Classy. Dr. Howell received his Ph.D. from Syracuse University in Cultural Foundations of Education. Dr. Howell is a longtime listener to the Christian Atheist, and we are thrilled to chat with him today. Welcome, Dr. Howell. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah, that's a familiar face, getting to be a familiar face now. Hey, Jenny.
She's out in the kitchen right now. She's my technology expert. She got it all set up.
Well, I know that this is really a 2-person job, isn't it?
Oh, it is, for sure. In everything I do, it's a 2-person job. We are one flesh in so many ways.
Well, I know that you, when you put out so many of these podcasts, that it just seems like it must be overwhelming. You do one a day, right?
Yeah, one a day plus. I guess if you add the 2, no compromise, and so one every day for 7 days a week. So that's a lot.
How long have you been doing that? About 2 years now?
2.5 years. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, it's almost 3 years, because soon after we got married in 2019, we came up with the idea, let's do a ministry. And that was what came to mind. So I started doing Christian Atheist things without really at first calling it that. And then we sort of morphed into it as we went forward. What else can we do? And we thought, well, we need to ground people in the realities of the world around us and the Western tradition that we've lost. And so then we did Simple Gifts. And then, because the content of the Christian Atheist is so complex and deep and hard to understand, we launched No Compromise to try to sort of explain some of that stuff. So, yeah.
Interesting. So you have a segmented market there, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know how it plays out amongst our listeners. We have almost 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I don't know how many people are following on the podcast links. So,
right, you don't have any way to quantify that, huh?
Yeah, no, I mean, we get a report on how many listens we've had and things like that. But yeah, really no way to correlate it with the actual listeners who are out there.
It is sort of an interesting alternative and parallel to higher ed, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, I don't know if you follow things like Jordan Peterson. He's like given up on the university system, and he's trying to come up with an alternative that's more web-based and not like the online alternative, but like a real university, high-quality educational classroom experience that delivers content and a well-measured degree achievement. And it's pretty amazing what he's doing. And there's some others, too, that are pursuing it, and I'm really excited about all of it.
So we both share experience with higher ed, and I don't know if East Stroudsburg is like Youngstown State, where is East Strauss. Is that how you say East Stroudsburg? That where you
East
taught?
Stroudsburg, PA. Yeah, I was there for several years. Not there now.
But and was that a state university?
Yeah, State University. Yep.
Yeah, so Youngstown State obviously is, and so you really. I mean, I can talk about my faith, and I mention it, but in terms of a sustained discussion of it, that ain't happening,
Yeah.
and there are a fair number of Christians in our in our staff and on our staff and so forth, but in terms of dialogue with people about faith and serious dialogue about faith, that becomes a little tricky to conduct. So
are you still full-time in the university?
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
And figure I got a good 6 years to go. So
okay.
I thought about when I heard your podcast, I thought I should try that. But then I thought I looked at what it took to do that, and I, kind of tried my hand at writing a podcast and practicing delivering it. I thought, my gosh, I could maybe do one of these a month. one of these a month is not going to cut it.
Well, I'll tell you what, on some of mine, getting them out on a weekly basis, it's like, wow, how in the world, when I look back over where we've come, there's no doubt that there's the hand of God in it, because I don't think I'm capable of doing all the things. Well, I know I'm not, but even Jenny and I together, which I think is a pretty powerful force, it's just outside of the realm of possibility to put out high quality content week after week. I just don't see how it happens without the divine hand reaching down and giving you all of the things that come together each week, all of the elements. Yeah, it's astounding. It really is.
Yep. Well, I guess you do it enough, you get good at
it. I think we've gotten better. And one of the things Jenny tells me all the time that I need to get better at is being able to speak to a lower level of understanding, not dropping the quality of the content, but trying to speak to what I'm not used to speaking to, which is, upper level graduate students in a university. And it's hard for me to do that because of my academic background. But I think we've made some real progress, and she helps me an awful lot with it. So actually, we're already started. I'll use all of this content. Somehow or other, we'll piece it together into a good podcast. I would love to start with introducing our listeners to you, because you reached out to me, what was it, a year ago? Was it that long?
Probably not quite that long, maybe 6 months ago or so. And I had read your Through the Looking Glass. I listened to Through the Looking Glass podcasts, and I was hoping to get a written version of that, because some of it is pretty dense, and you need to go back through it. And it really helped to have the ebook, so that I could kind of go back and check and make sure I remembered correctly and so forth, and to see it as a whole also.
Yeah. Well, good. How did you find it? The book?
It was really fascinating. And, I picked up a lot of ideas along the way. I don't think I'm coming at faith from quite the same level. One area in particular in which we really differ is your lifelong quest for certainty of knowledge is something that I've never been burdened with.
Okay.
Because in academic leadership, I'm a dean, so people always say to me, "Are you sure?" And I say, well, I'm 100% sure that I haven't a clue. Yeah. This is an educated guess. Everything in life is an educated guess. And I think I'm a lot more confident about Christ than I am about the decisions I make day to day. But of course, he and I have lived together a lot longer than my colleagues. I've lived with my colleagues. So he has perhaps a considerable advantage. Yeah. But no, it was very, very generative. And I think we share a lot in terms of our life trajectories, and I was mentioning a few of these in my email, but one of them was an abrupt break with a family tradition, and in your case, Christianity, and in my case, let's say elite education, or aspirations to elite education. Yeah. And then a long trajectory of unbelief through a substantial portion of our adult years. Right. And then coming to Christ later in life, and also the dissolution of a difficult marriage. And in my case, it was I was not married to a Christian. I was married to a woman of Jewish upbringing who was an agnostic when I met her. We were both agnostic, but then became an atheist and later in life. And that became a point of friction when I started to pray and come to belief. And then the connection with a Christian woman who was able to walk the walk, and in her case had a lot more experience. In the case of my current wife, had a lot more experience than I did. So I actually was first introduced to the gospel at age 13. My parents did not know the gospel, and I didn't believe it. And it took 59 years before I was baptized. So God has really, really been patient, because I know I didn't come to the understanding of it on my own. I had a lot of help along the way.
Yeah, well,
but your book was a fascinating read.
Good. Was it insightful in any way? I mean, because I'm coming from like a philosophical background, and I'm not sure. I still don't know what your area is. Is it literature?
No, I got my doctorate in philosophy of education. So I did I took some philosophy courses. Kant and Hegel or Sartre were not on the list, really. I did some. The most valuable philosophical work I did was in ethics. From the standpoint of my job now, I quickly came to the conclusion that I was not going to reproduce myself as a scholar. Nobody wanted to do philosophy of education, and anybody who did want to do it would not want to do the kind I did, which was basically somewhat conservative. I actually
I was going to say, then Freire is not one of the people in your background that, I mean, when you left Marxism early, after what was it, 5 years, 6 years as a Marxist when you were 19?
Yes.
So
yes,
you
when
left
I was
that.
19.
So when you left that, you didn't come back to it through the educational training?
Oh no,
that's good.
I was exposed to it during the educational training, but I was, shall I say, somewhat sarcastically resistant to it. But I didn't go to graduate school. I went for a master's at the age of 34, and I started my doctorate at the age of 46. So I was kind of a late in life doctor as well as a late in life Christian. And actually, in the doctoral program, I took a lot of courses in philosophy, although I was formerly an education major. And one of them was a course in which the principal reading was Swinburne. And that was taught by a faculty member whose name I'm not going to be able to remember now. But so The Coherence of Theism was the name of the book that we read. And that introduced me to rigorous philosophical thought about the characteristics of God. And Swinburne obviously devotes a lot of attention, as the name would suggest, to demonstrating that these various traits of the God could coexist without logical contradiction. Of course, that fell well short of saying that there is a God, but just that you're not crazy. You would not be crazy if you believed this.
Right. And that is actually, in many ways, what I wanted to do with the Christian Atheist as a starting point. I wanted to simply make the case. And it's like I tell people, I'm not a Christian apologist. God doesn't need me to try to defend him. I try to point people to the truth, let them see it, think about it for themselves, and the truth can convince them. Because it's not like I have to convince myself. I have been convinced because I've looked at it from both sides clearly, and the best case is on the side of God, a God being there. It's just the most rational. In many ways, I feel bad when I go into a debate between a Christian and an atheist, because it's not a fair playing ground. We have so much more of the rational structures on our side than they do. They just have this notion of absence that they're trying to hold on to. And it's not a fair fight in a lot of ways. And so I often feel, even as a Christian, I often feel some sympathy for those who are trying to defend atheism. It's not an easy task.
Well, I always thought that atheism was a really untenable position. And my wife was, my former wife became a militant atheist. And she was also very angry at Christians and at the idea of God. And I thought, if there isn't a God, why would the idea of God make you angry?
Yes.
No, you're not compelled to believe. So, but evidently there's some conviction there that causes you to believe without you realizing it.
And you said something earlier about my lifelong search for certainty. And that was true, but leaving that go was probably one of the fundamental points that brought me back to Christianity and, well, to theism. Let's say theism first, because I came to the conclusion through studying philosophy, and in particular by studying Socratic philosophy, which originally I was quite angry about, that Socrates was right. We human beings are fundamentally ignorant creatures that are standing before a world that doesn't make complete sense because we can't grasp all of it. It's all outside of our ability to understand. And therefore, we'll never have certainty about anything, including the existence of God. But as Plato makes the point in the Phaedo, what we have to do is find that which seems best to us and then launch out on it as onto a raft, right? And sail through life on that raft. And if the raft is good, the sailing will be fine. Otherwise, you're going to go down and you better look for another raft. But for my life, for my money, and for all that I've done in my life, it is Christianity that has held up better than anything else I've tried. And that's why I'm still sailing on it. And because the companion on the raft is my wife.
That helps. And I know
that helps a lot.
I know you've been questioned about that. I saw the now what the name of this is going to escape me. The British guy,
Justin Brierley.
Justin Brierley. Yeah,
yes.
That was and I too married a Christian, my recent wife, and she told me before we got married that you're not supposed to be unequally yoked, but she was going to make an exception in my case. And then she said to me, she said, I'm not going to try to convert you. At the time, I was a theist, but not a Christian. And she said, if I tried, I couldn't, but God will convict you. And you'll do some reading in the Bible and you'll figure it out yourself. And I did. It took a few years, but she was patient, so I did. So I thought that was a very helpful distinction to draw between being a theist and a Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to actually ask you that question because I wasn't sure, having read through your preface here, whether or not there was a conversion to theism first and then to Christianity. But clearly, for what you've just said, that's exactly what happened. And that's what happened to C.S. Lewis, too, if you've read Surprised by Joy. It was exactly that same path. So the three of us, you, myself, and Lewis, have a lot of parallels in the way in which things happened. Now, for me, the transition from atheism to agnosticism and then back to theism collapsed quickly into Christianity, but that's because I was a Christian as a young person. And one of the things that Jenny said while I was, quote, still an atheist, she said, I've talked with you. I know what you did in your past. She said, you're a Christian now. You just don't know it, you dummy. And she didn't say it that way, but it's kind of like she knew it. And she was like, what are you doing? Just fall back into God's arms again. And that took a while. Even though I wanted it for many years, it took a long while before I could let go. And I don't know. Here's something. And for you, I think you're talking about a conversion that was from having never been a Christian in any sense, right? You were not a theist growing
Correct.
up. Okay.
No.
So in my sense, I don't feel as though I lost my salvation, or however you want to talk about it. In the meantime, from the time I was a Christian as a child, I don't feel as though I lost my salvation. So I'm not an Arminian in that sense. I feel as though I walked away from God and he just kept me along that same path. Just like when you talked about in your preface how God was most active in your life when you were deepest involved in the Marxist activities in which you were living. And when
I think that's very true.
Yeah, when I look back over that time, I mean, that was one of the things that helped me too. At the end, it's like, I see it now. And there's a clear parallel that I try to talk to atheists about when I talk to them that say this. God is there. I know you don't see it, but he's working things out in your favor always. You've just got to learn to let go and trust that just a little bit. Just open the possibility that you could go there and let God do the rest. And I found that message so clearly expressed towards the end of your preface here that you sent me. I thought that was right there at the end, I thought you brought that together so well in that. So I appreciated your sending it.
I have been wondering about the efficacy and the credibility of my testimony because obviously I lived through the experiences that I wrote about, the anger and the turmoil and the violence and the grief and everything that went with it without believing it all. And I just, as far as I was concerned, I was just being buffeted and by forces over which I had no control. And I was trying to figure things out as I went along. And it seemed like a lifelong journey of me trying to discover the right path and the truth and so forth. And then when I look back on it, I came to see that there were so many different times at which I had been nudged in one direction or another, or that I had been kind of compelled almost against my will to do something that I would not otherwise have done. And it seemed obvious that the Lord had intervened. In addition, I knew what the outcome was, and I had started to pray at about the age of, let me see, it would have been right after I got my first tenure track teaching job, which was at 53. And I started to pray then. And I made my first prayer, I made a bargain with God and I said, God, if you'll dig me out of this hole, if you're there, if you exist, and if you're there and you're listening, if you dig me out of this hole, then I'll pray with you every day of my life from now on. And I was walking the dog at the time. I was really, really, really frustrated with something that had gone wrong at school. And I got to the end and I said, this dog is exhausted. I got to bring him back. And as soon as I turned, I realized the answer to my question. And it involved a lot of work. But I did it, and I never looked back after that. I never had the same problem again. And I quickly rose and advanced in my career, and I continued to pray. So I had that experience, and I had that to look back on. But of course, the audience wouldn't, a skeptical audience would not have had that experience. And then how do you recreate the conditions of belief? But I suppose just, as you say, just telling the story and acknowledging what God has done in your life is the point of testimony. And I guess it could be encouraging to Christians. It can be at least stimulating and puzzling to people who are not Christians but are open to the idea, and probably pretty exasperating to atheists, right?
A lot of things are exasperating to atheists. Chief among them is when I tell them that they live by faith. And boy, that one raises their ire every time. But it's not like I'm trying to insult them. I'm just saying that you're a human being and you can't help but live by faith because we don't have certainty about anything. And so recognizing that and ceasing the search for certainty allows you to see that there has to be something beyond all of this sort of, I don't know, cardboard cutout reality that's anchoring all of this. Something is there. I mean, it is the very nature of human rationality to seek for causality behind that which we find. It is what drives the scientific process. It is the very nature of the human search. And if you're going to give that up, where do you stand? I mean, you've given up everything then. And that, for me, is like the ultimate argument. And it's the argument of rationality itself. Like C.S. Lewis said, I believe in Christianity like I believe the sun has risen. Not because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else. And
that's interesting. Yeah.
I love that quote. It is so true for me. I'm not sure. Go ahead. I was going to go to your experience in academia. Of course, maybe we should do more of your testimony so we can.
No, we can go any direction you want. Let's go to academia. So in academia, William Alston was the professor from whom I took a course in philosophy of Christianity, I guess, and with whom I read Swinburne, Syracuse University.
Okay.
And at Syracuse, and that was where I read The Coherence of Theism. But I did not become Christian or even a theist then. So I was not a Christian at the time, but I was conservative, and I was open to the idea of Christianity. I also, shortly after I got my doctorate, I pulled my kids out of public school and started educating them at home. Having children, though, pointed me toward a different argument, which I think you raise in your book, which is that morality is really impossible without God. And I remember rashly broaching this with my then wife, who was And she was very offended as an atheist that I would say something like that. And she said, well, you think that people like us are just, thieves and, whatever. I said, no, I don't really think that, but I do think that, and I do think that some of the arguments for socialization into morality and all of that are there's some element of truth to them, but for a moral principle really to be compelling, you have to be answerable to somebody for it. Because if it's just genetics or evolution or it's just socialization,
or herd instinct,
or herd instinct, the existence of a creator gradually became apparent to me through my sense of obligation to my children, a responsibility I could never abrogate.
Yeah, well, the children thing is one of those that most people find the connection to the ethics of taking care of children to be one of the most fundamental ties to the ethical impulse, because it's more than just a matter of how you feel. If that's all it is, then we would probably just be killing our children right and left, because it's not a matter of just feeling. There has to be more to the rational idea of ethics than that. And of course, the go-to philosopher there is Kant, and Kant's categorical imperative. If I were to align myself particularly with one philosopher in the Western tradition, other than Plato, Aristotle, the Greeks, it would be Kant. I find him incredibly compelling, and the idea of ethics as being a categorical imperative, that's the fundamental basis of ethics. There is a right way to do things, and it is our responsibility to do it. Where does that come from? It's either a real thing or it's not. And if it's not, then there's no such thing as ethics, really. So I agree with what you said.
That's right.
But when I talk to atheists, I almost never present it that way, because I never want to tell the atheist that they're not moral. In fact, most of the atheists I know are hyper moral. And I mean that in the sense that they're deeply concerned with moral issues and themselves want to advance moral causes. Even, I think, oftentimes more than a lot of Christians I know. So they're always concerned about that. And therefore, I think the moral argument might be a good way into atheist evangelism if we're going to do that. But yeah, I was actually going towards more of the question about academia in terms of how you deal with it as a Christian. We started talking about that a little earlier on. I have gotten taken to task in how I conduct my classroom, not because I preach, but because I dare even to bring up the notion of God and that there might be moral absolutes that we can't violate. We should not be violating in our culture, and we are. I am a Christian with the searching and skeptical mind of an atheist. I don't want to believe anything that isn't true. I know both sides of the looking glass, and I know them with open eyes. I choose Christ's side. I invite you to join me from wherever you stand before the looking glass. That's this week's episode. Thanks for listening. And remember, you can have your religious cake and eat it too. You can have reason, respect for science, a 21st century worldview, and be a Christian.